My mother-in-law announced my son's name to her entire church congregation 2 weeks before he was born, and it wasn't the name my husband and I had picked. It started, the way these things always seem to, with a baby gift. Linda had never quite forgiven her son Ethan for marrying a woman who didn't grow up 3 streets over from her, in the same subdivision she'd lived in for 31 years, going to the same church she still ran the flower committee for. She ran that church's nursery fundraiser every spring, and everyone in the congregation had either been baptized by the same pastor, borrowed a casserole dish from her at some point, or owed her a favor from the potluck circuit. She was not used to a decision in that family being made without her input weighing at least as much as ours. The first message came the week we found out we were having a boy. A screenshot of a baby name generator result already narrowed to 3 options, all family names from Linda's side, with a note. I did some thinking and these felt right. Let me know which one speaks to you. I hadn't told her the sex of the baby. She'd gotten it from Ethan's sister, who got it from the group chat Ethan didn't realize included his mother as a silent member. I told Ethan I thought it was sweet that she was excited, if a little presumptuous. He agreed, mostly because agreeing with me was easier than correcting his mother, and he'd spent 28 years learning which arguments weren't worth having. I didn't push back on Linda directly. I just took a screenshot of my own and started a note on my phone titled, simply, Linda. By the second trimester, the messages had a pattern. Linda would make a decision, present it as basically finalized, and route it through someone who wasn't me. She told the pediatrician's office, when she tagged along to one appointment uninvited, that we'd decided on formula feeding, when we hadn't discussed feeding at all yet. She told my own sister, at a lunch I wasn't invited to, that the nursery would be blue and cream because that's what a boy's room should look like. She told her prayer group, calling it a prayer request, that the baby would be named after her late husband, quote. Once the parents came around to the obvious choice, I found out about that last one because a woman from Linda's church, a stranger to me, stopped me in the grocery store to say she was so excited to meet baby Harold soon. I smiled, thanked her, and added the encounter to the note. Date. Location. Exact phrase used. Time stamped. Ethan kept saying the same thing every time I brought it up. She's just excited, she means well. I started to notice he said it faster each time, like he wanted the conversation over before it really started. I didn't push harder. I kept documenting instead, because I've learned that people who genuinely mean well don't mind being asked to slow down, and the people who don't mean well always find that request unreasonable. The naming ceremony invitation was the 4th incident, not the first, though it's the one that made me actually sit down and decide what I wanted to do with the note. Linda had booked the church's fellowship hall for a date 6 weeks after the due date, sent invitations to 40 people, and titled the event in cursive script on cardstock, welcoming Harold Ethan Whitfield to the family. We had told no one the name we'd chosen. We hadn't finished choosing it ourselves. When I asked Ethan's sister where the invitations came from, she said Linda had been, quote, so sure that nobody thought to ask if it was confirmed. I called the venue myself, the fellowship hall's booking coordinator, and asked whose name was on the reservation. Linda's prepaid, non-refundable deposit for an event neither Ethan nor I had approved. I didn't cancel it yet. I wrote it down instead in the note, which by then had a name and a date stamp on every entry. 2 weeks later came the nursery. Not the nursery we'd actually set up, we'd already painted it, quietly, on a weekend Linda was at a church retreat, specifically because of the naming ceremony incident. Linda had let herself into our house using the spare key we'd given her for emergencies only, and repainted one wall a pale yellow because, in her words on the note she left taped to our fridge, gender neutral felt safer in case we changed our minds about the boy's name once we saw sense. She'd also removed the letter blocks spelling out the name we'd actually chosen and replaced them with blocks spelling Harold. Ethan called it overstepping that came from a good place. I asked him to read the fridge note out loud to me over the phone. He did. Then he was quiet for a while and said he'd talk to her. I told him he didn't need to, that I had it handled, and I meant that literally because by then the note had 43 entries and its own folder of photos. The baby shower came next, 5 weeks before the due date. Linda had told the venue, a private room at her favorite restaurant, that the guest list was finalized at her numbers, not mine, and had quietly uninvited 2 of my closest friends by telling the coordinator they'd, quote, had a scheduling conflict, without ever contacting them. I found out when both friends texted me separately, confused, saying they'd received a cancellation email from a venue they didn't recognize, canceling an invitation I hadn't sent them yet in the first place. I called the restaurant directly, they pulled the email log, and there it was. Sender address registered to Linda's account, timestamp 2 days after I'd shared my actual guest list with her in confidence. The events coordinator, apologetic and a little rattled, forwarded me the whole thread without my even asking twice. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 weeks out, the hospital called to confirm a birth announcement package we'd never ordered because Linda had contacted the hospital's gift shop directly and arranged for 200 printed announcement cards to be ready at checkout, quote, to save us the hassle during such a busy time. The cards read Harold Ethan Whitfield, 7 pounds, born to proud parents Ethan and Linda's daughter-in-law, my own name left off entirely, replaced by a description. Ethan saw the proof copy before I did, since the hospital emailed it to the account on file, which was his. His first reaction, he told me later, was a flat, "She didn't run this by either of us," in a tone I hadn't heard from him before in 6 years together. I called the gift shop myself, canceled the order, and had it replaced with a version I approved, at my own cost, with explicit instructions that any future changes needed to go through me directly, by phone, no exceptions. I didn't tell Linda I knew about the cards. I wanted to see whether she'd bring it up herself, or whether 200 wrong announcements would simply have shown up at the hospital gift counter as a surprise, the way the nursery and the shower and the fellowship hall booking had each arrived as a surprise, always framed as help, never once as a request. She never brought it up, which told me everything about what would have happened if that order had gone through uncorrected. That was the moment I stopped being upset and started being calm, which, if you've ever actually been furious at someone, you know is a far more dangerous place to end up. I didn't confront Linda. I didn't tell Ethan the full extent yet, not until I was ready. I printed the church prayer request screenshot. I printed the fellowship hall reservation. I printed the fridge note about the nursery wall. I printed the shower cancellation emails and the hospital gift shop order, 39 pages in total, 3 hole punched, in a plain navy binder, and I brought it to the baby shower Linda had, ironically, insisted on hosting anyway once her guest list scheme fell apart. The shower was at Linda's own church fellowship hall, a fact she mentioned 3 separate times while walking guests to their seats, as though anyone might have forgotten in the 2 minutes since arriving. She stood up before the cake to give what she called a few words, and what turned into 9 minutes about how she'd basically been present for every step of this pregnancy, how blessed everyone should feel for her guidance, and how she hoped I would, quote, grow into the kind of mother this family deserved once the baby arrived and reality set in. I stood up right after her. I didn't raise my voice. I thanked her for the toast, genuinely, because it made what came next so much easier. I said I'd actually brought something too, since Linda had clearly put so much thought into this pregnancy, and I wanted everyone to see exactly how much thought that was. I opened the binder to the first page, held it up, and read the prayer request screenshot out loud, the one naming the baby Harold before we ever had. Then the fellowship hall reservation, prepaid, in Linda's name, for an event we'd never approved. Then the fridge note about the nursery wall, word for word, in front of my own mother, who hadn't known about the break in repaint until that exact second. Then the shower cancellation emails with the timestamps in front of the two friends Linda had quietly uninvited, both sitting 3 tables away, both hearing for the first time that they'd never actually been dropped by me. Then the hospital gift shop order, 200 cards with my name replaced by a description, canceled just in time. Nobody laughed. Nobody gasped, not the way it happens in a movie. It was quieter than that, and worse for Linda because of it. I watched people's expressions shift, 1 table at a time, the way understanding actually spreads through a room, slow and then all at once. Ethan's father, a man I'd exchanged maybe 100 words within 6 years, stood up, walked over, and asked to see the binder himself. Linda tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd only ever been trying to help, the same phrase she'd used in every single entry in that binder. I said that was fine, that I'd actually saved room for her side of things too, and I held up the very first page again, the church screenshot, still visible on my own phone's photo roll for anyone who wanted to check the timestamp hadn't been altered. Ethan didn't say a word the whole time I was reading. When I finally sat back down, he reached over, took my hand, and said, loud enough for at least our table to hear, that he was sorry it took him this long to actually sit with everything I'd been quietly showing him for months. Linda left before the cake was cut. She sent a long message to Ethan that night about how humiliated she felt, being exposed like that in front of her entire church community. I didn't respond to it. I let the binder speak for the 7 months I hadn't. Our son was born 3 weeks later, healthy, with the name we'd actually chosen together, the one that had never once appeared in any of Linda's cursive invitations or hospital cards. Linda visited once, briefly, in the hospital hallway, and left without asking to hold him. Ethan and I agreed, calmly, on exactly how much of a role she'd have going forward, and for the first time in 7 years, that decision didn't route through anyone's version of what was best for us but our own. Linda called 2 months after the birth. Not to apologize, not exactly. She said she'd had time to reflect, and she wanted to, quote, move forward as a family, and could I please stop bringing up old messages every time she tried to be involved with her grandson. I told her I hadn't brought up a single message since the shower. She had, in that very sentence. She tried a version of the same thing at Thanksgiving, 5 months later, standing in her own kitchen, telling Ethan's aunt that the whole binder incident had been blown wildly out of proportion by people who enjoyed drama. Ethan, standing right there with our son on his hip, said he didn't remember it that way at all, and that he'd gone back and read every page of that binder himself, twice, and didn't think there was anything left to argue about. Linda changed the subject to the stuffing. What actually shifted, more than any single conversation, was how Ethan started handling things going forward. Any decision that used to quietly route through his mother now came to me directly, first, every time, without my having to ask twice. When Linda offered to plan our son's first birthday party, Ethan thanked her and told her we already had it handled. She didn't argue. I think, in her own way, she'd finally understood that the binder was never really about a name or a nursery wall. It was about who got to make decisions in a family that wasn't hers to run. Ethan's aunt still tells the fellowship hall story at every family gathering, usually to someone new, usually starting with, "You have to hear what this one did at her own baby shower." I let her tell it. It's a better story from someone else's mouth anyway, and every time she gets to the part about the hospital gift cards, somebody at the table always asks the same question. Did you really print all of it out? I did. I still have the binder. I've never needed to open it again, which is, honestly, the entire point of having kept it in the first place. The binder still exists. I keep it in the nursery closet, not because I think I'll ever need it again, but because it's a good reminder of something I actually believe now. If someone keeps telling you they're just trying to help, the kindest thing you can do for both of you is start keeping receipts, quietly, calmly, until the day you don't have to raise your voice at all. Case closed. What would you have done?